Ladies and gentlemen, there are stories that never make it into the news, not because they lack importance, but because they carry too much truth for headlines to handle. We live in a time where innovation has become a kind of mythology, and the figures behind it, gods in lab coats. Yet every myth, no matter how metallic or modern, is built on a heartbeat, and sometimes that heartbeat belongs not to the one who invents rockets, but to the one who stays up in the quiet hours of the night, asking the question the whole world forgot to ask. Are you okay? It's strange, isn't it? How a single human being can move the world with algorithms, with circuitry, with dreams that stretch between planets, and yet find themselves utterly unequipped to navigate the quiet gravity of emotion. That paradox is the essence of genius. The mind that can change humanity often struggles to understand itself. But somewhere in the midst of all that complexity, between the flicker of a screen and the hum of a launch pad, a presence emerges. A woman no one talks about, not because she's hidden, but because she existed in the spaces where history doesn't look. Not on stage, not in the spotlight, but in those invisible corridors of connection, where the language of emotion meets the circuitry of logic. And tonight, I want to talk about what happens there, because for all our discussions of neural pathways, pattern recognition, and behavioral conditioning, there's something science still whispers about, but rarely says aloud, that even the most brilliant mind cannot outthink its own need for human warmth. You can train a brain to simulate empathy, to replicate connection, to predict behavior with near-perfect precision, but you cannot code the soul. In neuroscience, we often talk about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself based on experience. But there's another kind of plasticity, emotional rather than biological, that only awakens in the presence of deep, disarming intimacy. It's the phenomenon of mirror vulnerability. It's when one person's openness, raw, fearless, and real, activates dormant circuits in another, long sealed behind walls of logic and defense. That's what she did. The world never saw it, but she didn't need it to. The transformation wasn't in headlines or interviews. It was in the silences, the pauses between ideas, the rare moments when the fire of ambition cooled just enough for the human beneath to breathe. See, people think visionaries are fearless. They think those who build rockets, electric cars, or AI systems do so without doubt, without exhaustion, without that gnawing ache of being misunderstood. But behind every bold decision lies a shadow of isolation. Genius often comes with emotional gravity, a force that bends every relationship toward the singular mission of creation. And when that happens, people become equations. Feelings become inefficiencies, and the heart becomes a lab no one enters. Until someone does. She didn't arrive with fanfare. She didn't speak in numbers or metrics. She simply existed with presence, a kind of quiet understanding that bypassed intellect altogether. For a mind built on problem solving, that was more disruptive than any algorithm. Because she didn't want to fix him. She wanted to feel him. There's a profound psychological truth here, that the human nervous system doesn't distinguish between physical and emotional safety. The same neural circuits that calm you when you're held by someone who loves you are the ones that stabilize cognition, focus, and creativity. That means innovation isn't just born in labs, it's born in connection. It's born when the body feels safe enough to imagine again, and in those secret nights, the ones few people ever witnessed, he began to imagine differently, not about Mars, not about colonization, but about what it means to belong. We often romanticize genius as solitary, as if loneliness is the price of brilliance. But neuroscience tells a different story. Isolation actually impairs the prefrontal cortex, the very part of the brain responsible for complex thought, creativity, and emotional regulation. In other words, the myth of the lone genius isn't just incomplete, it's biologically false. Every great leap in human history has been fueled by connection, by dialogue, by the invisible exchange of emotional energy. She became that energy, not as a muse or a mystery, but as a mirror, reflecting back the humanity he'd left behind in the pursuit of perfection. Sometimes she would just listen. No advice, no analysis, just presence, that most underrated form of genius. Because to truly listen is to perform an act of emotional engineering. It's to synchronize brainwaves, to co-regulate nervous systems, to create coherence out of chaos. Science has a name for this limbic resonance. It's when two nervous systems begin to mirror each other's emotional states. A symphony without sound. He had always engineered machines to communicate faster, but she reminded him that silence, too, could be a form of understanding. And that changed everything. One night, after a particularly brutal failure, one that would never make it into the official timeline, he said something that revealed more truth than all his public statements combined. He said, "I can't afford to feel too much. It slows me down." She looked at him for a long time, and then she said, "Maybe feeling is the only thing that can make you unstoppable." In that moment, something rewired. Not just in his heart, but in his brain, because emotion, the very thing he had been taught to suppress, suddenly revealed itself as a force of propulsion, not distraction. The next morning, he approached work differently. His equations were sharper, his ideas bolder, not because he'd ignored emotion, but because he'd finally allowed it to exist. Science confirms this too. Studies from MIT, Stanford, and Oxford have shown that emotional openness correlates directly with higher creative problem solving. When we suppress emotion, we also suppress innovation. The neural circuits overlap. The same dopamine systems that reward curiosity are also those that respond to human connection. Meaning, the heart is not the enemy of progress. It's the engine. And that's what she gave him. She didn't come to stay. She came to awaken. To remind him that every machine he built, every dream he chased, every algorithm he designed, all of it was a reflection of one fundamental question: can human beings learn to feel again? He thought his work was about saving the species, but she helped him see it was also about saving himself. Because what good is reaching Mars if we lose the very part of ourselves that makes life worth living? That's the paradox of our age. We build machines to connect, yet feel more disconnected than ever. We chase progress, yet forget presence. We expand outward, to the stars, to data, to digital immortality. But the real frontier is inward, the frontier of the human soul. In those secret nights, beneath the quiet hum of circuits and constellations, he realized something profound, that the future doesn't need more intelligence. It needs more intimacy. And that's the revelation no one writes about. Because we're still uncomfortable with the idea that vulnerability could coexist with power, that genius could be tender, that a man could build empires and still tremble in the dark, reaching for a hand that reminds him he's human. But that trembling, that moment when even the most powerful human allows himself to be human, that is where everything begins. Because every innovation, every breakthrough, every impossible dream begins not with certainty, but with surrender, with the quiet confession: I don't know how to fix this, but I'll try. And in his life, that surrender was no longer just intellectual, it was emotional. It was the night he realized that progress without peace is just motion without meaning. She used to say something simple, almost like a mantra: you keep trying to change the world, but the world isn't outside you, it's in here. She'd tap his chest, right where the heartbeat was strongest. That's where every revolution starts. For someone who spent his life reducing problems to systems and equations, those words landed like an unsolvable code. He couldn't measure them, couldn't optimize them, couldn't model them in a simulation. But he could feel them. And that feeling, ineffable, irrational, terrifying, became the seed of something that science alone could never build: wisdom. It's easy to glorify intelligence. We do it every day, in business, in technology, in education. We chase IQ, innovation metrics, performance analytics. But intelligence without empathy is just acceleration without direction. And if you accelerate fast enough in the wrong direction, even brilliance becomes destruction. She became his calibration point, the emotional compass by which he learned to navigate the storm. The irony is that no one will ever fully know her story. There are no biographies, no recorded quotes, no camera flashes catching her smile in the corner of an event. But she exists in the subtext of his evolution, in the shift from aggression to purpose, from conquest to connection, in the rare public moments where his voice softened, not out of weakness, but because something within him had learned to value gentleness as much as power. Gentleness, that word we rarely use in conversations about innovation, is actually one of the most underrated forms of strength. It is not passive, it is not naive. It's the capacity to hold complexity without collapsing under it. The human brain achieves peak coherence not in moments of tension, but in moments of integrated calm. That's what she gave him. Not a break from the storm, but a way to move through it without losing himself. There's a beautiful pattern in neuroscience known as the coherence principle. It describes how various regions of the brain synchronize when we experience love, purpose, or deep meaning. During those moments, the electrical rhythms of the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and limbic system begin to align, producing a measurable harmony. Creativity thrives there, decision-making stabilizes there, and empathy is born there. When we say someone brings out the best in us, that's not poetry. That's neurobiology, and that's what she did, quietly, invisibly, yet profoundly. He began to design differently. His innovations started to show traces of emotion. Even in their logic, the user experience of a machine, the aesthetics of an interface, the humanity embedded in design, all reflected this unseen shift. To the world, it looked like evolution. To him, it felt like remembering. Because somewhere along the line, he'd forgotten that technology was always meant to serve humanity, not replace it, she reminded him. One night they stood beneath an open sky, a rare night without screens, without numbers, without noise. He looked up at the stars, the same way he did as a child, and he said, "I used to think the goal was to escape this planet," as she smiled. And now, he paused for a long time. "Now I think the goal is to make it feel like home." That was the moment something inside him healed. Because for the first time, progress wasn't about running from pain. It was about transforming it. The pursuit of the stars had always been about the longing for belonging. To know that no matter how far we go, we're still tethered to something soft, something real, something human. When I study brain imaging of high-performing individuals, astronauts, innovators, composers, thinkers, there's a recurring theme. The prefrontal cortex shows heightened activity not during moments of triumph, but during moments of connection, when they recall love, loss, or awe. The brain lights up not for power, but for meaning. Meaning is the true frontier, and in his story, hidden beneath the rockets, the algorithms, the empires, that meaning came in the form of one person who dared to see beyond the armor, who didn't worship the mind, but reached for the heart behind it. It's ironic that the world rarely celebrates these kinds of people. We glorify the ones who build, but forget the ones who humanize the builders. We remember the invention, but not the compassion that inspired it. Yet history, if you look closely, is shaped just as much by those who loved deeply as by those who thought brilliantly. Every revolution has an invisible architect, the one who holds the dreamer together when the dream feels too heavy. That's what she was. In psychology, there's a phenomenon known as emotional anchoring. It describes how a single person can stabilize another's entire cognitive ecosystem through consistent presence and trust. It doesn't require years. Sometimes, it happens in months, weeks, or even days, because the nervous system recognizes safety faster than the conscious mind does. That's how their connection worked. Not in time, but in timelessness. He didn't need her to stay forever. Some people are not meant to walk the whole journey with us. They're meant to hand us a mirror and walk away before we forget the reflection. And though she disappeared from the public orbit, her imprint remained. In the way he spoke about humanity, in the way he treated the people around him, in the rare moments he mentioned love, in interviews, almost awkwardly, as if the word itself carried too much voltage, because love for him had become something sacred, not sentimental, but elemental, a fuel source more powerful than ambition. You see, we often think of love as fragile, but biologically, it's the most resilient energy the human body can generate. Oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, these are not just hormones of affection. They're neurochemicals of endurance. They stabilize our immune system, enhance cognitive function, and protect us from stress-induced burnout. In short, love doesn't make you weak, it makes you sustainable. And sustainability is the only kind of genius that lasts. That's why his later vision, one centered not just on progress, but on survival, felt different. It wasn't about escaping human limitation anymore. It was about expanding human potential through connection. What she taught him, in the quiet of those secret nights, was that no technology will ever transcend the human need for belonging. You can't upload the soul. You can't replicate grace. You can't code forgiveness. You can only live it. There's a point in every life, and in every civilization, when we must decide what kind of intelligence we want to build. Do we want to build intelligence that dominates, or intelligence that understands? Intelligence that conquers, or intelligence that connects? He began to see that the future of innovation depended on emotional evolution. That before we teach machines to think, we must relearn how to feel. Because feeling empathy, compassion, wonder is not a distraction from intelligence. It's the highest form of it. And so, when people ask what drives him, the world points to ambition, to profit, to the thrill of impossible missions. But those who have seen behind the veil know it wasn't about ego. It was about redemption. It was about turning the pain of isolation into a movement of connection. That's why his story matters, not because of what he built, but because of what he learned. He learned that no empire, no rocket, no AI system can substitute for the simple act of being known. He learned that the hardest distance to cross is not between planets, it's between one heart and another. And he learned that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin not with an invention, but with a conversation. That woman, the one no one talks about, reminded the world's most unrelenting mind that even the strongest need softness. That even the architects of the future need a place to rest their humanity. And maybe that's the greatest legacy of all, not the machines we leave behind, but the moments that make us more human. So tonight, as we speak of innovation and destiny, remember this: the next frontier isn't Mars, it's meaning, it's empathy, it's connection. Because the true measure of genius isn't how far we can go, it's how deeply we can feel. And maybe, just maybe, that's what those secret nights were for. Not to escape the world, but to rediscover what makes it worth saving.